Whoa, did you level up? That was a very loud, like I heard like a very loud like level up sound from
I
like
I know.
it's I heard like an Xbox notification, like you unlocked an Xbox achievement.
Yeah, I'm
How
actually
do
questing
I,
right now. I'm playing World of Warcraft. Just I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
how do
But
I
it did
level
sound
up?
like
I
that.
want to level up too.
Yeah.
Say that again, Diego. What was that?
I just said I would like to level up too.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Hey, that's
You're
why we have BitcoinOS. We level up with BitcoinOS.
Yago, you're already the final boss, okay?
He has the profile pic and everything. He's like on the Bucks cover art, you know.
I know.
Well, here everyone is a boss.
That's a good one. I like that. I like that. I wish we had. See, our branding is like we're going to be unveiling stuff soon, but like we're planning to call people that follow Bima boomers.
Boomers, that's great.
Yeah, because I mean we got boomerangs, you know. It's like fellow boomers.
Mm, that
Boss
works, that
is
works.
just a happy coincidence. We only realized after we started referring to the project as Bitcoin OS that it's actually just boss.
That's actually yeah. So that's a really funny thing. So so we had like to figure out what our names were like, for the company for like a few times. Like we were like a few different things. You know, there was like BBL was one of the names at one point, and like one of my investors was like, let's not do that. So we couldn't do BBL. So we were like, okay, then like I named Bima after like I don't know if there's any like people that are familiar with Hindu mythology, but there's a demigod by the name of Bhima, and the number one thing that investors used to always say when we were doing our round or whatever is like, oh, he's a cool founder, he's hungry, he's hungry, he's hungry, and the hungriest guy I knew was this like mythological demigod. So I was like, all right, let's just take the H out of Bhima and just call it BIMA. So
What
and then
what makes him so hungry?
so he's basically the son of the wind god, and he has immense strength of 100 elephants. So he has to eat a lot of food, and he's really strong, really, really strong. So he just has to keep up his body weight, the protein, and that's what makes him hungry. It was Piyush that came up with Bitcoin Maxi. He was the one that was like, "Oh yeah, Bima actually stands for Bitcoin Maxi." I was like, "That's a good retrofit. That's a much better retrofit for us." But yeah, I mean, it's a similar story to Boss, but yeah, no, naming stuff is fun.
I do like the boomers though, that's funny. And
Yeah,
BBL is definitely like good call on passing on that because I would
yeah,
not want to be called a BBL.
yeah. BBL and Boss. Yeah, that would not have been the best name. But
Is
yeah,
BBL a euphemism for something?
BBL is Brazilian butt lift. That's what it means.
Uh,
I was this close to asking GPT for, but I was hoping for not event.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. No, it's yeah, BBL. There's no euphemism for BBL. BBL is BBL.
All right, guys, like why don't we just get started? And then whoever joins, joins. Sid, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and then, just go into just Bima Protocol. Tell us what you guys are doing, your mission, why you guys started it. And then let's take it from there.
For sure, yeah. Hi guys, thank you guys so much for having me. First of all, I really appreciate it. Very close, as I mean, we've been working together for quite a bit here and there, and very excited to sort of be, to be here. So thank you for that. First of all, the first thing is, my career. I guess you could say, I guess my journey with Bitcoin. It started in 2018, back when it was 18K. That was that feels like forever ago, and that's really what got me in. I was much more interested, like many of us here, in the technology of the asset than the actual, financial speculation of the asset. That's not to say that it's a wonderful, sort of tool for, inflation and so forth, but I just love the tech so much. So I did research opportunities at places like Neo Smart Economy because I didn't know what a blockchain was at the time, and there were a lot of people building blockchains in general. So they were enterprise chains. There were, private chains, public chains, and then there was Ethereum, and there's so much out there. I decided, that this is going to be probably what I'm going to pursue for the rest of my life. Ended up working, engineering for a lot of the sort of places that some of you might be familiar with: FalconX, Alchemy, Casper Labs. I eventually worked at Apollo on Wall Street. We invested in, companies in the digital assets team. But what I think is the most pivotal experience that I had was actually working in apprenticeship under Tim Draper, and alongside him and his family of funds. That was awesome. At the beginning, I didn't really get that much face time with him, but I had ideas on how to do this. I was one of the co-founding citizens of the City Out project with Scott. So it was the first DAO to buy and own land under the Wyoming DAO LLC law. So I was thinking about this because I thought DAOs were such a great way to syndicate capital back in the day, and I just thought that, listen, why don't we do something like that with venture, and people like Syndicate were coming out. So I wanted to build something like that, and I kind of pitched this to Tim, and I had like a 17 slide deck, no 20 slide deck. I was over prepped. I've never pitched a billionaire before in my life, so I was just talking to him about this, and I think 3 slides in, he got the idea, and he's like, "Oh, that's a great idea. Let's do it." And the remaining 17 of the slides were complete fluff. So it was just a long sort of call from there, but it was a great opportunity for me. I ended up running that fund as a GP for around 2 years, co-investing into a lot of different types of deals in the digital assets, healthcare, space field. It was a tough market for sure, without a doubt, to raise capital or even allocate capital in private markets. But at the end of the day, it was such a rewarding experience for me because I met a lot of the investors that eventually invested in Bima through that sort of network and through that process. So that fund actually got merged into Draper Associates. Prior to Tim, wanted to build my own company. First company flopped. It was my first try. Can't blame me. Second company ended up getting sold and acquired, and it sort of got merged into the sort of Casper Labs family of sort of entities. And I basically had nothing to do in October, November-ish of 2023. I didn't really have much to do. I was trying to figure out, what do I do next? What's the next thing I do? I knew Sriram from Eigenlayer quite well. So he was, he was a professor at Berkeley at the time, or not at the time. He was a professor at Berkeley. He'd been making Eigenlayer for quite some time, and I was like, let me build a stablecoin backed by the AVSs in Eigenlayer. But then I think it was in March of 24, I basically went on a trip to Vegas with Tim, and it was a great trip. He gave everybody $100 to go out and gamble. It was awesome. It was my first time gambling too, mind you. So it was great. And I think at some point when we were coming back, we were at the Las Vegas airport. Tim got a Lego for his grandkids. I got one for myself, and we're just sitting there with Legos in our hands talking about Bitcoin. And I asked him, because he has so much Bitcoin, I was always so curious as to whether he uses it or not. Back in 2013, he used to invest in startups with Bitcoin. And the SEC told him you couldn't do that. So he stopped doing that. But I was super curious as whether he's used that in any shape, way, or form since then. The answer was no. He has found zero utility. And probably today, he's probably still found zero utility to use his Bitcoin. And he has close to $3 billion worth of Bitcoin right now. And I, I was always familiar with these borrowing structures. What do you do when you have assets that you do never want to sell, and you want to hold and keep the upside? You borrow against them. Elon Musk does that. Jeff Bezos does that, and they do that to kind of get some liquidity on their net worth. So rather than having to sell your Bitcoin, which is a cardinal sin, why don't you borrow some dirty fiat and be able to use it? And this is where he really started getting curious, and that's when I really started understanding that this is something that should be built. And this was a renaissance when Babylon and now BitcoinOS and all of these different amazing sort of blue chip projects are emerging. This was the time to be building and enabling programmability on Bitcoin, because prior to this, no one was doing it. And that's where Bima was born. So far, we're very excited, and we are live with our test net. We have and are kind of gearing up for something big coming this month, and we'll be very excited to sort of show all the progress of, people want this, and we're excited to show the world that people do want this.
That's fantastic. Honestly, your journey is insane. For it just having been what, like 6 years?
Yeah,
Or
that's right.
yeah. Wow, wow. That's fantastic. So how did you come across Boss?
It's a funny story how I came across Boss. So I think Yago and I were connected through Sovereign, or I think one of my head of ecosystem, Piyush, he was connected. But I actually know, I actually knew Calvin from BitcoinOS, because through Steve from Casper Labs. So I was like, it was a very small world, right? Because I think, Steve's also planning on doing something in the Bitcoin space. So we kind of got interconnected and our wires crossed, and I was like, wait, there's a lot we could do together. And I knew Bitcoin OS from several things. I would see them at like events and stuff, and we'd hang out together, and it was great because I think this is probably one of the most well-connected teams in Bitcoin, period, and also one of the smartest teams technically. And I think it's really something to kind of admire in this space. So I was like, this is makes complete sense that we should do something together, and execute on it.
Mm. Well, we're very happy to have met you, my friend, and we look
Likewise.
forward to collaborating further for sure. I guess, kind of guide us through like some of the products over at Bima, and then we can, move into kind of the integration and what that looks like on both ends.
Absolutely. So the basic product that I always envision for Bima is a value accrual across this value chain. And what I mean by that is that you look at the current stable market out there. J.J. Abrams, who is one of the most prolific directors in the world, he had a really big spiel about Star Wars, how it's like a mystery box fetch quest. Okay, you get something like okay, the droids land on Tatooine. All right, next, next, next. Okay, he buys it. What's next? All right, now what happens? Oh, the land, the stormtroopers killed their aunt and uncle. Okay, what's next? Okay, they go to Obi-Wan Kenobi. So there's always a mystery box element that you have to continue using it. And that's one of the biggest things that I've seen in the space. Vitalik likes to talk about a trilemma. He talks about, security, decentralization, and throughput, right? Scalability, essentially. I think stablecoins have a similar trilemma in its own regard as well, and that's going to be across this lens of the volume, which is the TVL. It's the yield, which attracts people to be able to acquiesce more assets and degrees of earn money on top of their stables. And then I think the most crucial component that a lot of people haven't been able to execute on, it's the utility. And I think what you see with things like current offerings or prior offerings, um, there is no continuum across that value chain. Prisma does not have any native yield bearing components. They, very highly depend on points. There's no actual yield. Um, Same for stuff like, I would say a lot of other sort of varieties. There are no native yield bearing opportunities that come within the product. So the way the Bima product works is it's an over collateralized centralized deposit, sorry, over collateralized deposit model. We are not centralized at all. The biggest thing we can have is people can bring their Bitcoin in whatever form it exists. So this is LSTs, LRTs, derivatives, UTXO assets, Bitcoin and its most pure, which we'll get to later, of course, with Bitcoin OS, hint, hint, you'd be able to sort of collateralize it. And 2 Bitcoin in is going to output, let's say, 1.2 Bitcoin's worth of stable assets out in the form of our flagship product, USBD. And then you have a slew of products that you'd be able to use on our own application itself. The first one is a stability pool. So let's say that I want to, and Michael Saylor says this a lot, right? The ability to basically borrow against your Bitcoin to purchase more Bitcoin assets is one of the most important things that you do. And that's the whole sort of thesis behind MicroStrategy and their bandwidth. That's something you could do with a stability pool, is that when there is a default, if there's a lack of collateralization, if there is a liquidation in every regard, what will happen is there's a liquidation penalty that's applied to the Bitcoin, and people can come in and use USBD to pay off the debts and get Bitcoin at a discount. So if your vaults, let's say, are under collateralized or hitting very close to the liquidation, those will be liquidated first. The least collateralized vaults will be liquidated first. Um, stables will be sort of there's a liquidation penalty applied to it, and people can pay off your debt if you cannot pay for your own debts. Other people can pay off your debts and get Bitcoin at a discount. But the second component is a lending borrowing module within our actual DApp itself. So if you want to borrow USBD and use it in the wide variety of ecosystems that we plan to work with, you will be able to use that in that regard as well. But our third is the most important. I think it's an incredible mechanism to kind of work in the sort of CDFI and DeFi realms. So we'll actually have different structured products that are very sort of popularized by the Athena model. Athena, they have close to, I would say, they have, I would say, anywhere between, 8 to $10 billion worth of scale for the delta neutral. With Bitcoin, it's much larger. So, but the issue is that if you choose one strategy, you pigeonhole yourself. So, doing a delta neutral basis trade with one strategy, it can only cap your scale at 10 billion. But this is a borrowing demand that's going to be hitting hopefully the trillions in a few years. So, what we actually do is we have a portfolio of products. So, the delta neutral, gamma neutral, rho neutral, data neutral, and all these different types of carry trades that enable people to get different types of risk and reward profiles and earn yield on them. That's really sort of how our product overall works. We work with a wide variety of ecosystems and chains. We like to be agnostic. And I think the main component that we really like to focus on is this DeFi product is meant for people who are having an appetite in DeFi itself. When you see people out there, I think we don't want to rely on having ownership over the value chain for infrastructure. That is hard, cross-chain swaps, bridges, roll-ups, validators. That's hard. And I guess that's leading into your next question about how we're working with Bitcoin OS and how we're sort of making sure that we can kind of because there's a whole market out there of people that do not want to bridge or wrap their Bitcoin.
Were you, Sid, sorry, were you done talking there or?
Yes, I
Oh, I
was.
got
That was a very cliffhanger kind of end. Sorry
it.
about that. I was like trying to lead it into it. I was like, all right, are we talking about the integration now? But that's the product, how it works. I just wanted to segue. I just wanted to try to segue.
Yeah, no, you're fine. You're fine. I was like, wait, is he done talking or did he just lag out real quick? Um, but no, that's fantastic. Thank you for expanding on that. And I guess Yago and David, would you guys like to just give a quick, simplified, explanation of just Bitcoin OS and kind of what we're doing, just for our new community members here, just before we get
Sure.
into the kind of like the
So I think
integration?
this is a really great day to be having this conversation. Um, Today, for those maybe some people don't realize, today Bitcoin can finally get its driver's license. Bitcoin just
Happy
turned
birthday,
16 years old
Bitcoin. Yes.
today. So Bitcoin is finally in a position to drive real adoption and growth because Bitcoin can finally drive. Um, and for years and years, I've been sort of waiting for the pieces to come together um, that will allow me to never have to sell my Bitcoin. So I've been, accumulating Bitcoin now since before the first halving. And I've never sold my Bitcoin. And the reason is that I believe that I'm going to um, let my children and my grandchildren and maybe their children inherit the Bitcoin. And so the question is, if that's the case, right, I don't want to just be sitting on my Bitcoin like a dragon sits on gold in a cave in the dark, never being able to do anything with it. I'd like to be able to release the value. And I think a lot of people feel this way. They would like to be able to release the value and take advantage of the sort of huge amount of patience and diamond hands that they've demonstrated over the years. And it will also help make Bitcoin more valuable because it becomes easier in that case for more people to have diamond hands. Because if you know you don't have to sell, if you know you can unlock the value of your Bitcoin without selling, then the motivation to sell goes down. So for me, Bitcoin backed stablecoins have been a dream. And in many ways, I think the ultimate tool for Bitcoin to be able to actually compete with the central banks, to compete with the Fed, to provide a true alternative to them, to allow us to drive true mass adoption, is to provide a currency that doesn't fluctuate in value, but is that as secure, as decentralized, as censorship resistant, as unconfiscatable as Bitcoin itself. And the only way we can do that is by having Bitcoin-backed stablecoins that are secured by the Bitcoin network and don't require any third-party intermediary. And so this has been a dream of mine for many years. And I've been working towards it for over 10 years now. About 5 years ago, in the middle of COVID, a number of developers that I knew in the Bitcoin space came to me and they showed me some of the first decentralized DeFi tools that they had been cooking up. And I wrote a grant, and that team and that money eventually became sovereign, which grew into the largest Bitcoin ecosystem, Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem, which has done billions of dollars in trades and loans. And a lot of those loans have been done for the sovereign dollar, which was, and I think is today, still the largest Bitcoin, true purely backed Bitcoin-backed stablecoin in the world. And so this is something I've been thinking about for a very long time. The problem has been that while we can sort of imagine and envision this, we can build the smart contracts, we can build all kinds of DeFi platforms. None of them were truly secured by Bitcoin. None of them could truly integrate with Bitcoin. And I knew that that was always going to be a massive challenge. It meant that people like me, and I think that basically means most people, would not be willing to use most of their Bitcoin with those tools. And, I'm one of the people who helped build Sovereign, but even for me, the amount of Bitcoin that I was willing to put into various sovereign things, I considered huge and irresponsible, but still represented a very small part of my overall Bitcoin holdings, because I just consider the risk of having any trusted intermediary in the middle too high. So back in 2021, we started thinking about how could we solve this problem. And a little research group, which has been supported by members of the sovereign community, started looking into the ability to use rollups and use ZK proofs to actually, for the first time, bring true programmability to Bitcoin, and for the first time allow us to truly build Bitcoin lending products, Bitcoin DeFi products, and perhaps most important of all, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. And so that's taken us on a journey which ultimately led, by the end of last year, well, actually not even last year, it's end of 2023 now, we've realized that we actually had figured it out. And then in March, we wrote a white paper explaining exactly how we were going to do this. We published that white paper in April, and then for the first time ever, we verified ZK proofs on Bitcoin in June, so about just under 6 months ago. And since then, we've been building BitcoinOS to be a platform that makes it possible for developers of all kinds, for people who are building like crucial infrastructure, like Bima, to actually build a system where you can use real Bitcoin without it having to be held in custody by a third party, where you can actually issue the tokens on Bitcoin mainnet, the stablecoin tokens on Bitcoin mainnet, and where you can go further and issue these tokens to other chains as well, where they could be useful trustlessly with trustless bridging. And so BitcoinOS is a lot of things, right? It's an operating system for Bitcoin. It's an operating system broadly for crypto, which allows crypto to be anchored to Bitcoin. But because it's such a general purpose, such a powerful platform, um, it will allow many things, but to my mind, one of the most important, maybe the most important initial applications is going to be Bitcoin-backed DeFi and specifically Bitcoin-backed stablecoins.
Wow, that's truly amazing and very, very exciting. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Bitcoin DeFi this year, honestly, and kind of all the changes that that's going to bring into fruition across the entire space. So that's very exciting. And it's nice to see that Boss is essentially going to be leading that, right? But with that, let's kind of go into the integration. I guess, Yago, let's start, talking about our end of the integration and what that looks like, and then Sid can kind of talk about his end of the integration and what that's going to look like for Bima.
Okay, so there's different kinds of integration. There's different ways that they can integrate. I Let me talk on two levels. I think there's like the first level, which is sort of the easiest and probably the way we will see most developers begin to use BitcoinOS early on, which is they already have smart contracts. They've already built out these tools in preparation for BitcoinOS coming, in preparation for true Bitcoin DeFi coming. And so in Bima's case, if I'm not mistaken, they've built these tools out as EVM smart contracts. And then the challenge is, can we deploy those smart contracts to a chain that is integrated, that is secured by Bitcoin, by BitcoinOS? And so here we're actually going to make the life for developers really simple, where what we can do is we can work with the rollup, and we can work with some other chain, get them integrated into BitcoinOS, and then the ability to access BTC becomes available to literally every single application, every single dApp that is built on that chain. So our first mission is going to be integrating the chains themselves. Then the sort of options open up to the developers, right? So they can now go take this a step further, right? So in phase one, basically people will be able to trustlessly bridge, so to bridge their Bitcoin with cryptographic integrity over to the other chain. If the chain is a Bitcoin rollup, that chain will also be secured by Bitcoin. And then that BTC, that XBTC, right, that cross-chain XBTC, which I'm going to just call XBTC, that XBTC can now be put into the smart contract and stablecoins can be issued against it. We can take that a step further. And the way we can take that a step further, and this is into phase two will introduce programmable tokens on Bitcoin itself. And then you can have the smart contract live anywhere, like on one of these chains, but all of the activity actually occur on Bitcoin mainnet. So you'll be able to take your BTC, lock it up in a vault on Bitcoin. That vault will be a smart contract which will issue on Bitcoin programmable tokens to you, right? These stable coins. And those stable coins will live on Bitcoin mainnet and you'll be able to use them in your Bitcoin wallet, right? And so I think that's where we're ultimately heading, and that's how we get there.
Fantastic. Thank you for expanding on that. And Sid, how about the integration on your end? How do you guys, foresee integrating Boss?
Yeah, I think Yago did a wonderful explanation about the Grail product and the bridge. So there are two ways that I would say that we would work together. Is that I think so. This is what we've really seen from a lot of LPs in the Bitcoin space. Um, People with Bitcoin do not want points. They do for their cost of borrowing or cost of just deploying. They're like, okay, sweet, you are going to give me some points so that you kind of meet my cost of equity or whatever it is to deploy my Bitcoin. But what they want is actual yield, right? So putting a carrot on a stick is really what we are for Grail, right? And for Bitcoin OS. You can stream these XBTCs, and it'll really help us help these Bitcoin holders, basically borrow against their existing assets and get yield on top of it without having to sort of let go of it, right? I think that's a very important component about these BTC. That's super critical for what we're doing. I think the end goal is like, listen, when I've seen this ecosystem grow, Yago talked about how Sovereign was made and how it became and spun out of all of these different types of DeFi products that, initially came with a DeFi summer and stuff. But I would basically say that the Ethereum ecosystem has been the domination of DeFi, the DeFi dominator, if you will, for as long as it's been around because of its programmability. What was the reason that people came en masse, people used Ethereum en masse? Because it was programmable. Bitcoin did not accommodate for this factor because it didn't need to be. It was like, listen, we want a peer-to-peer system. That's it. That's all we need to be. But people realize that, in the same way that you could create companies, protocols, lifestyles, and whatnot on Ethereum, they should be able to do that and unlock that value with Bitcoin on Bitcoin. So, while we sort of focus a lot on the LST wave that's coming out, LRT wave that's coming out, it's low hanging fruit for us. I would say that it's extremely important to kind of discern that while we are very focused on getting liquidity of Bitcoin in whatever way it exists, the end goal is we want Bitcoin to have the same degrees of adoption and same degree of programmability, use case, and to be honest with you, mind share that Ethereum used to have. I think Bitcoin's always had that amazing mind share when it's come to liquidity. But when it comes to programmability, there's a whole different barrier to that. And I think that's something that the second product that I think would be very helpful for with us is, we've seen a lot of standards emerge in the past 2 years, runes, ordinals, BRC20, each with their own slew of liquidity drawbacks and whatnot. But I think the ZK prover aspect that Diego has mentioned is super critical for us. Imagine you come to the Bitcoin bridge, rather than you have basically a choice. You could stream the BTC, or you could either, go to the bridge and stream the XBTC, or, and this is the second thing that's super important, if you want your assets to be on the Bitcoin chain itself, you could basically come and deposit it to a sort of vault that we have basically allocated as an address on the Bitcoin chain itself. And you'd be able, with using the EVM logic, Solana logic, Stacks logic, we don't care, using a degree of programmable logic that is already sort of paved way, we could basically mint out this USBD and it'll stream back to the Bitcoin chain. So all the user really sees is I've put my Bitcoin in, I've borrowed against it. Done. I think that's lovely because at the end of the day, people like, it's like what Saylor said. I saw someone comment that I've my voice is like quoting Michael Saylor and stuff, but yes, I think the main reason that people want to borrow against their Bitcoin, there are really, 2 to 3 reasons. The first one is if I'm a miner and I'm mining, these different types of Bitcoins, and I want to pay the bills, I want to take liquidity out on it. Prior to this, you would have to go to a centralized banking institution, and you would basically need to put up your ASICs as collateral. That's what Apollo did. Apollo on Wall Street, they were like, we can't take digital assets as collateral, but we could take, the ASICs as well. I think it's become more common to give cash for these things. So one thing is payment, right? Borrowing against it and using digital collateral. The second component, which is there as well, is I would say that they would want to borrow against Bitcoin to do a Sailor sort of strategy, which is I borrow against Bitcoin to buy more Bitcoin, and borrowing against Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain itself to purchase more Bitcoin is awesome. I think that's you don't need any exchange. You don't need any centralized exchange. Then you could just use your Bitcoin stable on Bitcoin mainnet itself to buy more Bitcoin. And I think that's really, really amazing. So I think these two integrations really work. So the first one is we would use the Grail bridge to stream Bitcoin in the form of XBTC on whatever programmable ecosystem that the user wants to gain access to. And the second component is one day you want to have this on-chain money, literal like Bitcoin native stablecoin. No need for a standard change or whatever. It's on the Bitcoin mainnet itself. It reduces friction, and you have your stable with you, and you'd be able to use it on the without leaving the L1. So I think those are the real two ways that it would work. Our end, that's one thing that's really awesome about BitcoinOS. I think BitcoinOS really understands that, why rebuild the wheel? Why do we need to create scaling solutions for programmability and different programming languages on top of Bitcoin? Why don't we basically become a different type? Why don't we use the backend and programmability that, Ethereum and all these different sort of types of assets have used, and make sure that we can really create an incredible ecosystem to kind of not rebuild the wheel, right? It's very important. So we just need to use our EVM logic, and our security is going to be extremely important. And imagine if you have to use like tons of different types of programming languages, those audit costs are going to go up, right? And it becomes extremely marginally more intensive to get that type of scale. But with products like what BitcoinOS is building, you don't need to. You can basically have your logic in whatever programming language. It's like BYOB, bring your own Bitcoin or whatever, and you can basically use and stream as you see fit. So we're extremely excited for what this is going to really unlock for us, because I think the two use cases that you've seen are a big reason why we're in such, I would say, in relatively high demand for a product like this. But yeah, that's I think it's incredible what you guys are building, and I think it's going to help us a lot.
I really like the BYOB, bring your own beer analogy. In our
Yeah,
case, I think it's BYOC, right? Bring your own compute.
bring your own compute. That's a nice one. I like that. I like BYOB. We're just thinking of like branding stuff in this call, like bosses, boomers, BYOB. Like this is a marketing call. This isn't an AMA.
Well, I think every good. Maybe people on the call will have some ideas, because well, the best projects and the greatest success is when you can merge, cutting edge technology with cutting edge memes.
Yeah, I think marketing and branding is super important in community, right? That's what's super critical at the end of the day.
By the way, I
Exactly.
don't want to be boring but can I add something that Sid really inspired me to think about when it comes to security? And of course, Diego and I, we think
Sure.
about this a lot. But one of the things that we talked so much about before was that, like, Bitcoin isn't the same once you've wrapped it and you put it on another chain. That's at least the reality today, right? When you've taken your native BTC and you've moved them into WBTC, they're not actually Bitcoin anymore. They're Bitcoin owned by three signatories: Justin Sun, BitGo, and someone else, right? And that's something that people are currently not discussing that much. We have seen since the WBTC happened, you did see that Aave took a stand. There was a cabal of DeFi protocols that took a stand against what happened to the security of WBTC and other entities like Coinbase, CBBTC, etc., started minting their own bitcoins. We still haven't seen any of these really fail, either intentionally or unintentionally. But with the security behind them, eventually DeFi protocols run the risk of the wrapped Bitcoin essentially vaporizing, becoming completely insolvent because it gets wrong somewhere in the backend, or they're just not intentionally. There might be something wrong with some part of the code. With the Bitcoin that you wrap or that you lock into the Grail vault, that Bitcoin is it's orders of magnitudes more secure than a permissioned multisig or a permission majority vote. Like we always say, all you need is one honest validator, and that one honest validator can veto the whole system if they prove that a lock-in is dishonest. And when you expand that, the number of validators to 1,000, for example, one divided by 1,000 is like 0.001%. And that's like 100 times or 1,000 times more secure than when you require like 51%, which is Bitcoin, or 2/3, like 66%, which is some of the other kind of majority vote systems. So that brings a lot of inherent security to the solvency of the DeFi protocols themselves, so that the protocols can stay solvent and not run into bad debt situations, which is very important in the long run.
I'm glad you expanded on that, David, because I feel like a lot of people don't really know what kind of like comes with wrapped Bitcoin and what that essentially entails. Um, so it's definitely interesting to kind of just like showcase it kind of with what we're doing and how it differentiates. But I think Yago wanted to actually jump in and say something.
No, no, sorry.
Oh, you didn't. Okay, sorry. You unmuted your mic, so I figured you had something to say. But Sid, you
David knows
were
what he's talking about. Yes, David's the goat, man.
he really is. Truly quite the wizard. So Sid, you were talking about kind of like the security end of things. So obviously everything we're doing is ZK powered on our end. How will the integration with Boss kind of enhance the security and like trustless nature of your protocol?
Yeah, I think what David said is very important. Bitcoin's not the same when you go to other chains, and it's a hard fact you have to kind of admit. But imagine if a $2 trillion asset is still getting roughly $50 billion in mobility. Uh, that's that's a lot of value. That's still pretty good. So I would say that the security assumption that we really have here is, you know, like I said, we have audited EVM logic. We've gone through 4 audits, and I think the entire sort of um, we don't have any dependency risk, which is great. The security of this is as important as it is. I mean, both of our projects have been significantly audited, such that it's like two puzzle pieces that click together. So a integration with us and something like a Grail or a Boss, at least for the Grail, sorry, a Bima and a sort of Grail, we would be able to integrate, just like two puzzle pieces clicking together. It's really just some sort of a routing mechanism for us to get Bitcoin. The other end of this, of course, is what Yago mentioned, which is the sort of BTC using EVM logic in the back end to mint on BRC on Bitcoin mainnet. That is something that I think has a huge degree of programmability that we could really enable. That would need to be audited. I think the security of this, however, using these ZK provers on Bitcoin, is pretty legendary. I don't think that people have been able to do this as succinctly and as positively as Boss has. And this ecosystem has kind of seen these different degrees of people trying to commit this and prove this, but now having some sort of proof verification on top of Bitcoin is going to be extremely important for projects like mine. I think it's important for Bima to kind of work, and anybody to really work with BTC OS, because at the end of the day, the trust assumptions of the bridge are such that it's doesn't need to prove anything. They literally have to prove that they don't have to prove anything but the fact that your Bitcoin is where it is and the Bitcoin at the other end is where it is. I would think that the security assumption that we would need to focus on is about the new asset that's generated. So Bitcoin to a new chain, outputting Bitcoin, that's as simple as can be, right? However, Bitcoin outputting Bitcoin on a new chain, going and using the EVM logic, outputting a stable asset that's USBD, and then bridging that onto the Bitcoin mainnet, that's a completely different story. And I think that's something that's going to require a little bit more of an upgrade when it comes to the sort of keys. As for sort of what we're thinking, I mean, the stack is in Rust. We have Rust code ready. I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue, but I think the security of the newly generated asset to be minted on the Bitcoin mainnet, I think the security that needs to be there is to make sure that what are the sort of mechanisms of the underlying output on the Bitcoin mainnet? Because once you start going into this process of, okay, we've outputted this ERC20 on ETH, and now it's bridged onto the Bitcoin mainnet, so you can basically have this token be verified and used in the same way you could use it on ETH. It's going to require a degree of, I guess, a little bit more of sort of like, kind of like the way I like to say it is like the imitation game, right? But with Benedict Cumberbatch and everybody, it's like you have to kind of think like the criminals. You have to kind of think like what is the front running. You have to kind of think about what are the ways to game this, what are the ways to exploit this. Because at the end of the day, you don't want anybody to do any of that, and you want to make sure that there's a very, very sort of trustless aspect to that. But once that happens, I think that's the biggest thing that could probably happen. Because the moment a stablecoin can be minted 1-to-1 par to USD, on Bitcoin mainnet, that's huge. So security is important, but I think it's less so for the first integration much more so for the second.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you expanding on that. And Yago or David, did you guys want to kind of touch base on anything, regarding any security assumptions or anything along those lines in correlation with the integration?
Well, I think we often talk about security as something which is important to the individual or is important to developers, but there's another aspect of this, which is that it's important to networks. It's important to composability. It's important for the actual ability for a system to scale. So, um, systems which are centralized or have trust assumptions which are centralized, which is basically everything to do with Bitcoin today, um, they inherently have problems scaling, right? The centralized party is potentially regulated. They need to get licensed. They can only operate in areas which are licensed. Other parties can't use them as neutral technology. So, for example, when Coinbase wanted to introduce Bitcoin to their base network, they went and created their own sort of wrapped version of Bitcoin. And so that's going to scale very well in base, but it's maybe not going to scale so well in other places because they're not willing to use WBTC. Their competitors are not willing to use their tokens. Binance will never list that token. And so basically having these centralized owned systems, because of regulatory and competitive issues, because of KYC, because institutions will not trust them, they simply have a hard cap on how big they can grow. But Bitcoin doesn't have a hard cap on how big it can grow. Cryptographic systems don't have a hard cap on how big they can grow. And so when we can take systems and move them away from being a product to being a cryptographic system, we unleash the ability for them to basically become available as a standard. And as a standard, frictions are reduced. Developers can start doing things which are interoperable with other developers who are competing with them, and the whole system is able to grow at a much greater scale.
Fantastic. And David, did you want to say something?
No, I mean, no,
Or you
no,
just
nothing to
you're in
add.
your comment?
I'll just have to repeat what I said earlier, so it's all good.
Okay. So because we're kind of like getting to a close here, I did want to just answer some of the, or, just touch base on some of the community questions.
Sure.
So the first question that we had, and Sid, you can kind of lead the way with that, is why Bitcoin? Somebody said we have other chains. Why did you choose Bitcoin? Perspective of the gas fees and such.
I mean, why not Bitcoin? I'll answer that question with the question. Why not Bitcoin? That's the biggest thing we can do. Bitcoin is the world's most trusted asset. Back when I was working for Draper Associates, I used to work very closely with people, and there's a lot of skepticism surrounding DAOs, right? Because there's a lot of criticism around the decentralization of decentralized autonomous organizations. I think it was Joseph Holm that told me that Bitcoin is Bitcoin is the world's first DAO. It's the world's first DAO. It's the most decentralized asset in the world. Um, I like the analogies to gold. I like the analogies to real estate a little bit less, to be honest with you. But I like the analogies because it kind of puts in perspective what Bitcoin is. It is not a stock. It is its own type of beast. It's its own type of asset class. And I think that historically, what you've seen across these different degrees throughout human history, people who do not want to sell borrow. You've seen that with gold, you've seen that with silver, you've seen this in Pompeii, you've seen this in New York City, wherever it is, people have found a way to make sure that they can hold on to the value of a growing asset and ensure that they could borrow against it to use it in whatever way, form, and fashion. So the why Bitcoin, let's say for the asset, is pretty simple. Why Bitcoin on the chain is a little bit of a harder question. And I think the biggest thing is that, Vitalik had mentioned his trilemma. You talk about scalability and throughput, which is something Bitcoin does not necessarily have. But that's why we go everywhere. You know, I think our real differentiation is that at the end of the day, we're a protocol that's meant to serve users and sort of customers, right? And at the end of the day, you don't want to pigeonhole customers to go down one route or the other. At the same time, you don't want them to be shut out of one opportunity or the other. So while you could get more scalability, remember there are trade-offs to everything. And I think users need to understand that until more alternatives are enabled to actually acquiesce that sort of standard in the first place. So if you're somebody that, wants speed, yeah, probably not go on Bitcoin. You probably go on something like an ETH or an EVM or a Solana or whatever to basically be able to get that scale and speed. If you're somebody that doesn't care about speed, but you want to stay true to your native maxi, then by all means, that's why you choose Bitcoin. The reason why Bitcoin as an asset is important, but the reason why we want to go on Bitcoin is even more important. It's because we want users of all kinds of backgrounds to BYOB, right? That's really the answer why Bitcoin.
I love it. I love it.
So
And
let,
Yago,
I'd like to respond to that as well.
yes, please do.
The cost of a standard Bitcoin transaction today is pretty low. Um, it's cheaper than an Ethereum transaction, and a standard Bitcoin transaction is 250 bytes, okay, of data. Um, a standard ZK transaction with Boss is going to be 300 bytes. In other words, almost exactly the same size as the simplest Bitcoin transaction you can make, right? A non-SegWit standard Bitcoin transaction. So um, the reality is we will be able to perform lower cost than Ethereum, ZK proven smart contract transactions on Bitcoin, and we'll be able to put thousands and thousands of them into a single block. But ZK is extremely powerful. We can take multiple different transactions and roll them up into a single ZK proof. We can take thousands of transactions and roll them up into a single proof. And so you can use this as a scaling mechanism, even on Bitcoin mainnet itself. But beyond that, when you want to perform smart contract transactions, when Bima want to build on something which is high throughput, let's say you're not happy with 10-minute blocks, right? You want, instantaneous, right? Faster than Solana. Well, you can do that, right? You can have a system. Bima in a few years could say, look, we've become a very large protocol. Everyone wants to use our stablecoin. We want to be able to facilitate for developing countries like Argentina and Nigeria and the Philippines who are using us as the way that they get dollar liquidity. We want to provide for them instantaneous, super cheap, in fact, zero cost transactions. And so we're going to build the Bima rollup and we're going to roll it up to Bitcoin. It is going to have Bitcoin security, but the cost for a user to perform a transaction will be subsidized by us. And the cost for us is going to be so low that to the user, it is going to be free. So a few years from now, right, what I would love to see is projects like Bima, Bima themselves, having their own optimized environment, which is secured by Bitcoin for their use case. And so a few years from now, people across the world could be transacting in dollars that are backed by Bitcoin instantaneously and at zero cost. That's why we build on Bitcoin.
Wow. The final boss has spoken. That was a
That's
very,
yeah,
very powerful speech.
that was awesome. I'm blushing.
All right, guys, last question here, and this one's for you, Sid. What differentiates Bima's approach to DeFi on the Bitcoin network compared to other DeFi?
Because we're awesome. Nah, we are, but that's not the reason why we differentiate from others. It's very, very simple. It's because we want to build. I think one thing that you're going to see is that a lot of different sort of DeFi projects, protocols, on-chain mechanisms. The value for us is in our partnerships, and you'll see that what we're doing with Boss is we are passionate to build on Bitcoin itself because we understand that it is a user journey and it's an avenue that people want to take. They want to get an asset on the Bitcoin chain itself. They don't want to bridge. They don't want to, majority of the people that are using Bitcoin wallets, they're using it for custodians and institutions. That's the biggest component about it. And they're not going to want to, they have to build in their own BRC20, their own, runes, their own ordinal support into this. And that's just something that's going to create friction. The goal for Bima with BitcoinOS is we don't want to have friction. We don't want any friction. So it's the fact that we're ready to build. What differentiates us on this is that we want to find any and all avenue for people to be able to use our product. Right. At the end of the day, we're a protocol. We're a yield bearing business, and at the end of the day, as much as we want users to succeed in this protocol, we want more users to come to the protocol as well and succeed as well. I think our real focus is that we really do want people to kind of see, one of the biggest things I've seen with ecosystems is infrastructure ecosystems have dominated quite a lot, whether on Twitter, Mindshare, social media presence. But you don't see that much of a community when it comes to the degree of an ecosystem build around a protocol, right? Lending protocols are non-differentiable. Stablecoins at some point are non-differentiable. Lending, borrowing, dexes, perp trading, like these are all things that you could find one or the other kind of a fork on these chains. What makes things different is the creation of an ecosystem around a product. You've seen that with Athena, you've seen that around Usual Money, and you're going to see that around USBD. And that's really the fact that we're trying to accomplish here with Boss, is that we really do want to differentiate by making sure that users can use Bitcoin without having to, as least path of resistance as possible. I think that's what makes us differentiated, is that we have an awesome team. We've got great partnerships. Up here for one, and yeah, I think it's just that we want users to use, and we want more users to see those users and use the protocol as well. I think that's what differentiates us the most.
Absolutely. No, thank you for expanding on that. And actually, one final question here. So, our beautiful African community does not have, a lot of them do not have access to traditional banking, right? So, one of our friends here just asked, how do we plan on making Bima transactions as low as possible, especially for Africans?
Yeah, that's a great question. Hello, I'm very glad that we have a global presence. That's awesome to see that you guys have kind of at BitcoinOS have really have an amazing community here. To make transactions as low as possible, I would suggest either one of two things: going down a path of a chain that has low sort of fees. This could be Move chains, this could be Solana, and using your Bitcoin to transact there. I would say that it depends, and I'll pass it over to Yago, because if you were wanting to basically have low costs for transacting a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin on Bitcoin, how would you suggest they sort of kind of navigate that? Because I think that's a great idea, and I think it's very important. I can answer one of those, which is go down the path of least resistance for now and use more so high throughput, low fee systems. But at the end of the day, you want to accomplish what we've been talking about for the last hour. I think I'll kind of pass that to Yago for how you could accomplish that.
Well, I think even now you guys have a plan, right? With USBD, you guys are going to be launching on at least one EVM, low cost EVM chain.
Exactly.
And so the transactions from day zero are going to be, you know, more cheaper than Tron, right? Most
Yeah,
people
exactly.
they use USDT, they're using it on Tron. Tron has become more and more expensive over the course of the last year, and you're going to be able to outcompete that transactional cost from day one.
And what would we be kind of looking at in terms of like transaction fees? Like how low are we talking?
Oh, we're talking about like fractions of cents. At most, we're looking at 10 cents.
That's amazing. That's extremely low. And I guess that kind of like wraps everything up. I guess I'll, give you guys, the community, a second here if you have any final questions.
Pima is suggesting Nigerian Bitcoin
Oh,
Naira.
Piyush, yeah, that's my head of ecosystem, by the way. So yeah, he's he's doing our product research right now, live.
By the way, it's really funny that he's bringing that. Like, it's what just to say something. I'm reading this amazing book called Currency Wars, which actually I think was a version of that was banned in the US. But the first chapter talks about how if at the time you were to link the dollar to gold, how much the gold price would go up, because you'd have to buy. Let's say you bought all the supply of gold in the
To make
world
it
with
stronger,
dollars.
exactly.
Yeah, it'd be like, and it just got me thinking, like, what if the dollar was truly backed by Bitcoin? And when you looked at it, I went to look at, like, what's the dollar market, like how many dollars are in circulation. I think it's something like $30 trillion or $50 trillion. What's interesting is that Bitcoin is kind of like actually right now like a tenth of that, or like a 20th of that. It's 5% of that.
Yeah,
But that's a really interesting way to think about, like, if the world ran on Bitcoin, like how much money is there in the world, and like as you're able to redeem Bitcoin for dollars, the value of Bitcoin goes parabolic.
Yeah,
It has to
to
go parabolic.
it has to.
to think of that, it's just kind of like mind blowing. I can't even like comprehend it, to be honest.
Yeah, let's hope Trump does something. So,
Right.
please, we got a few more days. It's what today's January 3rd, right? We got a few more days, and then he'll be like, I'm sure he's going to mention something related to Bitcoin during his speech, and then
Yeah.
we'll sit back a little bit. we'll sit back a little bit.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for a fantastic conversation. And thank you to the community for partaking. Thank you for asking questions. Hopefully all your questions were answered, and hopefully you guys were able to kind of understand the, importance or significance of the integration and everything that it entails. But of course, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out and we'll be more than happy to answer those for you. As always, guys, this community call, or sorry, AMA is recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube. And as always, we'll also have a summary of everything that was discussed today, just in case some of the concepts were a little bit too difficult to comprehend. We'll make sure to simplify those for you. So thank you guys so much for everything. Once again, Happy New Year. And we look forward to seeing you all in the next AMA or community call.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me and us. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sid. We
Thanks,
appreciate you
bye.
being here.
Have a nice one. Take it easy. Bye bye.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
See ya. Bye. Thanks, Yago. Thanks, David. Bye bye.